There we go. And the next thing I want to do is just welcome you all. And with that welcome, I want to congratulate you too, because you all did something quite remarkable. And that quite remarkable thing is that you participated in the S.T.E.A.M Race to Space Reading Challenge. And I want to congratulate all of you that are here because you completed it. You went all the way through and you won the bonus points. Do you know that there are almost 2,000 students who participated in the reading challenge? And then only those that finished it got to get their bonus tickets. And you all went above and beyond so that you could put your bonus tickets in for this Zoom meeting with these two amazing astronauts. And it's our wish today that you enjoy this conversation and be ready to ask questions. And with that, let me just tell you how this is going to work. I'm going to introduce them. And then I believe Miss Lawrence is going to kick it off. And then we'll see if any of you have any questions, particularly to her. And then we'll introduce you to Miss Coleman. And then you can ask questions of Miss Coleman. And then you can just ask general questions about anything having to do with being an astronaut and space. So let me start off by introducing you to Wendy Lawrence. She became an astronaut. Before she became an astronaut, Miss Lawrence flew helicopters in the U.S. Navy, landing on different ships of Navy ships over 800 times. That's pretty remarkable. As a NASA astronaut, she flew on board the space shuttle 4 times. Her first flight on board Endeavour was an astronomy mission. Her next 2 flights went to the Russian Space Russian Space Station Mir. Her last flight on board Discovery went to the International Space Station. So would you all unmute and say, "Hi, Miss Lawrence."
Hi, Miss Lawrence.
Hello, everyone.
Now let's introduce you to Miss Coleman. Cady Coleman is an astronaut, a scientist, a pilot, and a musician. At NASA, she spent more than 180 days in space, including 2 space shuttle missions and a 6-month expedition living and working on the International Space Station, which we abbreviate to ISS. While on the ISS, she was in charge of science experiments and robotics, and she performed the first Space-Earth duet on her flute with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. And if you ever want to see it, it's on YouTube. Everyone, unmute, say, "Hi, Miss Coleman."
Hi, Miss Coleman. Hi, Miss Coleman.
Awesome. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to let Miss Lawrence open it up for starters.
Thank you, Pat. Well, I'm going to share a little bit about my path to becoming an astronaut because I suspect some of you may be interested in following in my footsteps and Cady's footsteps. But even if you're not interested in being an astronaut, you still may have an interest in working in the space program. So the path that both of us took to get to NASA will still be of interest to you because there are a lot of similar steps that you can take along the way. So with that, I just will jump right on in. So I know a lot of you live in Southern California, and that's where I did most of my growing up. My dad was in the Navy. We moved around a lot. I was actually born in Florida, but by the time I was in 1st grade, we moved to Southern California. He was stationed just outside of San Diego at a naval air station called Miramar. We lived to the north up in Del Mar and Solana Beach. So growing up, it was pretty fun to be able to walk to the beach. And that's where I spent most of my summers. But in the summer of 1969, when I was 10 years old, in fact, in July 1969, I had just turned 10. We were in the middle of the Apollo program, and Apollo 11 marked the mission that was going to send humans to the moon for the very first time. And on that mission, 2 men, 2 NASA astronauts, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, would walk on the moon for the first time. And I had the privilege of lying in front of our television at home to watch them do that. And there were millions of people around the world doing exactly what I was doing, watching this unfold on television, because this was history. This had never happened before. And it was amazing to watch it. Just hard to imagine that we were landing humans on the surface of another celestial object in our solar system. And I don't know what it was exactly about watching them do that, but I could not take my eyes off the screen. I was absolutely amazed by what I saw, probably because it looked so unlike anything that I had seen down here on planet Earth. The background, as you can see here, was just so different than anything that we have here on planet Earth. And I remember thinking to myself, that looks like an incredible job to have. In fact, I think that's what I really want to do when I grow up, when I'm an adult. I want to be an astronaut. I want to have the chance to fly in space. So as I finished up high school, I still very much had that dream. And I had to think about what steps should I take to make this dream come true. And I knew that a lot of the NASA astronauts at that point in time had been in the military. They had studied engineering. They'd gone to a service academy. They'd learned how to fly. Well, in my family, people went to the Naval Academy. That's what my grandfather did, my mom's dad. That's what my dad did. They both became Navy pilots. So I headed off to the Naval Academy and I studied engineering there. And I also became a Navy pilot as well. Whoops, what is going on here? There we go. But unlike my grandfather and my dad, I thought it would be far more fun to fly a helicopter because you can do so many different things with a helicopter. I mean, they fly sideways, they fly backwards, they stay in one spot. You can do a wide variety of missions. That's what we call it. So in one flight, you could be delivering food. So think about working for Pizza Hut. You're the delivery driver, you're an Uber driver, you move people around, you're a FedEx driver, you deliver parts. Sometimes you have these parts that are on this long, what we call pendant and a cargo net below your helicopter. I've actually flown a Jeep to the beach before. Wow. That was kind of fun. And you're always part of the team. And for me, that was always a really fun aspect of being a pilot, flying helicopters. Two pilots, a couple people we called air crew. Together, we would figure out how do we need to fly the helicopter to get our job done. And when you're an astronaut, you're always part of a team. You have a crew that's going to go up into space to do the mission, but that crew has also got to work with their flight control team, their training team. So learning how to be a good crewmate was great preparation for life as an astronaut. But what I really wanted to do, I mean, I love flying helicopters, but I really wanted to fly a rocket. And so this is a great picture of my first space shuttle, Endeavour. If you've ever been to the California Science Museum, you have had an opportunity to see Endeavour. So I've got to ride on the space shuttle and do that 4 times. The rocket is incredibly powerful. I grew up going to Disneyland, riding the Matterhorn. Riding the rocket is much more dynamic, spectacular ride. Matterhorn was fun. The rocket ride, much better. As Pat told you, on my first flight, we got to do astronomy. We had some special telescopes in the payload bay. We looked at distant stars and galaxies. We were trying to detect any helium that might have been left over from the Big Bang, if it in fact occurred. And I'm happy to say that we did actually detect some of that helium with those telescopes. It was my job to sit up in either the commander or the pilot seat up on the flight deck of our orbiter and make sure the spaceship was pointed in the correct direction. And then we do our observations. And then my last 2 missions, I should say my middle 2 missions went to the Russian Space Station, and my last mission went to the International Space Station. And Cady has much better pictures of the space station to show you. But a lot of hard work, and all it took me 25 years to make that dream come true. I just tried to put together a series of steps that I could take one after the other to eventually get me to where I wanted to be, which was working at NASA as an astronaut. So yes, a lot of hard work, but all of that work was worth it because it's absolutely amazing to wake up in the morning and realize that you are in fact living your dream. So with that, I will stop sharing and let you all ask questions of me if you have any. If not, we can let Cady share her story as well.
You can raise your hand or electronically or, okay, Jolene Lynn, unmute and ask your question.
You said that you detected helium that was left over from the Big Bang. So how did you detect it with the telescopes?
Because we had some really smart scientists and engineers who knew how to design the telescope to detect that residual helium. So our telescopes, they knew what part of space they wanted to point the telescopes. We were looking very, very far back in time, and they had a special type of sensor on board the telescopes that would allow them to detect the signature of this residual helium. So it was our job was to point the telescopes and start recording the information basically. And then all that information got sent down to the ground for the scientists, the astronomers in particular, to do the analysis. And so it was well after our mission had concluded that they told us that they did in fact detect that helium as they looked through all of the data that we collected.
Great question.
And we just launched on Christmas Day. How appropriate. What a great Christmas present for the people who worked on this telescope for many, many years. We just launched the James Webb Space Telescope, which is even more powerful than the Hubble telescopes, more powerful than the telescopes that I flew on that mission. And the James Webb Telescope will be able to look even farther back in time to the very beginning of our universe and continue studies like we did with our telescopes on that mission.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lawrence. Reagan, I know you had your hand raised. You can unmute.
I was wondering, what qualities does a person have to be accepted into NASA?
What qualities? That's a great question. Teamwork, as I talked about, is definitely one. The ability to learn as well. Nobody shows up at NASA to be an astronaut having been an astronaut before. You were something else before that. In my case, I was a pilot in the Navy. Cady will talk about how she was a scientist. She did research. And so you have another job before you become an astronaut. And so you show up and you have to learn how to be an astronaut. You have to learn how your spaceship flies. So the ability to learn new things, a sense of wonder and curiosity, I think is an important as well. You have to be pretty focused and determined and a patient person. You don't get to fly immediately. So sometimes it may take you years, but there are a lot of different qualities. And I'll let Cady answer that as well. But more than anything, you have to be patient because, as I said, it took 25 years. So being able to stay focused and determined over that period of time, hopefully doesn't take you that long to make the dream come true, but being able to be persistent and to have that perseverance, those are other good qualities to have.
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is try to remember your questions, everybody, because now I want to introduce Ms. Coleman, and then we'll go back and answer all of these other questions. But I want to make sure you have an appreciation of both of these remarkable women. So Ms. Coleman, please do your introduction.
Well, thanks. Actually, I'd love to be on in the same Zoom and the same everything as Wendy, in that we arrived at NASA on the very first day as new astronauts in 1992.
Cady, I gotta show the picture.
Oh, can you?
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
So we were much younger.
We were younger. So here's Wendy. See Wendy there? Yep. There's me. And actually, you'll notice that, so in our class, there was 21 guys, and then Wendy and Mary Ellen and I were the women in the class. And it says our title, The Hogs. Oh, give me just a second, Wendy. Hold on. Wait.
All right, I'll...
So when Wendy's in my class arrived, we were talking about different qualities for astronauts. And I mean, everyone is literally something else first, and no one starts off to be just an astronaut. And there's there's school teachers, school principals, former policemen, and then of course the scientists, engineers, doctors, pilots that you might think about, and other aviator kind of people. But we had a veterinarian in our class, and the way I tell the story, Wendy, is that our class, through Rick, we adopted animals at the Houston Zoo. And so we adopted snow leopard cubs and Vietnamese pot-bellied pigs, but nobody calls us the snow leopards. So we are the hogs. And so there's always sort of oh, look at oh, Wendy, oh, yay. So we always have
Pigs in space
around, and every couple of years I find this is my newest pig, Wendy. I just couldn't resist. Anyways, I love to hear Wendy talk, because we've shared a lot, and we share a lot of differences, and we share a lot of things that we have in common. But one thing that I'd love to hear about was that sort of step-by-step kind of process. And I'm somebody that, if I look too far down the road, like, oh, I'd like to do this, and what are the steps I need to do that, whether that means answering a homework question when I have perhaps waited a little bit too long to start answering the homework. You might think that doesn't happen with astronauts, but it certainly happens with me. And that feeling like, oh, there's not enough time, and if I already knew that, but I don't have time to think about this. And to me, that's the same feeling. Wendy and I both each rode crew in college. And that feeling of being in a boat, and you're going to race along. And when you start off, it's not like, you row really hard right from the very beginning. And I'll have this feeling like, I don't think I can do this for 300 more strokes. I mean, I can barely do it for 10. But if I just think that I can do the next one, and I can do the next one, for this homework problem, I can figure out this part about it. What do I know? Let's list the things that I do know, instead of beating myself up about the things that I don't know. And it's that step-by-step kind of thing. And in a way, you have to be able to look kind of ahead and go, I'd like to be going this way, but not be so focused on the end that it makes you be overwhelmed by the sort of here and now. And I think that's when you talked about what kinds of qualities astronauts need to have, they need to have cats. I'm pretty sure of that, There we go. This is Max. This is our new kitten. Anyways, those qualities are good for so many kinds of things. So I'm going to show some slides and I'll be a little quicker about what I've been showing here before, so that we can have more questions more sooner. So this is, me in my Russian spacesuit, which I never thought I'd get to wear, because I flew twice on the shuttle, and then I got to spend almost 6 months up on the space station. And Wendy talked about, landing on the moon, and, not that she landed on the moon, but what that was like, and her family, and what that meant to her. And to me, learning about astronauts, my dad was a deep sea diver. And so that sort of idea of living someplace or exploring someplace that was kind of dangerous and people didn't usually live, I mean, that was kind of normal in our family. But everywhere I looked, I saw pictures like this of 7 wonderful, amazing explorers, but all of them having one thing not in common with me. In terms of, I saw only guys in these pictures. And I'm very proud to show you the picture of the most recent class of astronauts. And Wendy, do you know, on the far right, Denise, do you know her background? She's Navy, right? I want to
yes. So no, I think she's a FA-18 pilot.
Yes, that's exactly right. Exactly right. And then, and one of these people, you asked who are astronauts. I mean, there are scientists, there are engineers, there are doctors. There is an oil well drilling expert. Which one is that? Do you know?
Move your cursor. What's her first name? Yeah, she's
right
also
Yep.
I'm pretty sure she's also was in the Navy for a while. But
And
yeah,
so-
she learned how to she lives up in Alaska, and she works in the oil industry, and it's her job to make sure that the drilling down to the oil is done correctly and safely.
And actually, I got to go to Antarctica as one of our training exercises and live in a tent and search for meteorites for 6 weeks. And but there was also a crew of people that were drilling ice cores in Antarctica, literally, looking back in time as you go down the layers of the ice core. And interestingly enough, many of the drilling teams were made up of women, that it wasn't this sort of brute force. There was a certain finesse in just understanding what the machine wanted to do and didn't want to do. And I had this thought, like, I just really hope when we start going to Mars that we don't have the NASA folks thinking, well, this is a space thing and we're only going to use space crew people. I'm really hoping that they look for people who already know how to do this. And so, I think it's interesting that we need people with a lot of different skills to do big things like returning to the moon and going to Mars. And for me, the steps that I got to do as part of that mission were to fly on the space shuttle twice. Once was practicing science experiments for the space station. The station wasn't even built yet, but we're figuring out, how do we want to do experiments up there so we build the right space station? And in fact, that was our interview question. Do you remember that, Wendy? Are we building the right space station?
Oh, I didn't get asked that question.
I did. It was hard, I thought. Anyways, and I think I guess there were different questions every week. And there's the space shuttle going through the speed of sound.
But that's the space shuttle you were on, right?
That is, and I was on there. I was right under the little windows, right at the top up there. And it is a wild and wonderful ride that is just, we delayed 7 times over 30 days for our flight.
Yeah. How many cookies did you eat in quarantine?
I think we figured out it was like 2,200 cookies. But we were not alone, okay? I was not the only person eating those cookies. I mean, there's 7 people on the crew, and we were in quarantine, but we got to see our families, like not our families, but our spouses. And so we would bring a few cookies, and then you look at this bag of cookies, and you have 3 cookies in it. You're like, well, that's not very many. And so we'd each bring 5 or 6 or 7 cookies to go run around, and just, run around the Space Center and be in quarantine, not meet people, but drive around and see really cool rockets and things. But those numbers all added up to 2,200 or so cookies in the end. So we were in quarantine for quite a while. So when as a crew, there were 7 of us on this mission, and 5 of us had never been to space. So we were so excited to be, after all those delays, you start thinking, were they kidding? Like, maybe people just told me we were going to go and we're not really going to get to go. So when you really lift off and I couldn't see above the window above my head because your helmet's in the way, but you can have a mirror on your knee board and look at the mirror and see above your head. And I could see like the blue sky going to black and the white clouds just going shrinking. And it was just so amazing. And then this is a picture of my home. Or our home, I will say, which is the space station up in space, and you can see the space shuttle attached there. And I was not in there, but I was in the spacecraft taking the picture in this case. And I love this because it actually shows you how far away or how not far away we are from Earth there. And I'll just quickly go because I want to get to questions. This is the crew that I went up to the space station with, Dmitry Kondratiev in the middle from Russia, and Paolo Nespoli on the right from Italy. We went up at a small Soyuz, a little tiny Russian spacecraft. And when we get there, this is the space station that we're going to dock with. It is huge, like the size of a football field. But we do not live in this place where all the solar arrays and the radiators and the robotic arm, and this is where all the big equipment is. But we live on the 50-yard line in these modules. They're all like the size of like school buses, but some are like big regular size school buses, like here on the right, that's the Japanese module. But over here, this is like more of like a minibus, but without the seats in it. So it's really quite a big space, and there's 10 of them. So it's really a huge place. And this is about a 1.5-minute video, and then we'll take questions, where this kind of just sums up, getting ready for launch, reporting in, climbing into the tiniest elevator imaginable. And then we are right inside this tin can here. Our capsule, our whole capsule assembly in 3 pieces is there. And so when we don't need the outside protective cover, it blasts off. And now here we are docking to the space station. That's my favorite scene, even though you see my butt. And then living and working up in space. That big canister there weighs like a couple 100 pounds, doing physics experiments. And I am not a physics person. you know, in that it's harder for me to do physics. It means I had to ask a lot of questions. And we all get to do things that we love. And this is the other views of the space station as we left. And then just what it looks like to look out the window. You're looking through the window. There's a solar array. You see the clouds. We didn't get to see Aurora Australis or Aurora Borealis every day, maybe 10 times or so when I was up there. But it is really magical and amazing. This video is sped up, so it's a little bit disturbing actually to me because we don't go this fast. But you get to see that green atmosphere. It's not really green, that's just the reflections. But you'll see how thin and fragile our atmosphere is. And then it's just really wonderful to realize that down there on Earth is everybody that exists, except for the 6 of you, which is kind of cool. And right now we would say the 10 of us, because there are 7 people living on the space station, the US and the International Space Station, and there are 3 people living on the tiny space station. And with that, I will just stop sharing and we'll take questions.
Thank you. First of all, that was so beautiful to watch. Okay, I'm going to go to Houston. Am I saying that correctly? Harari?
Hussein.
Thank you. Thank you. Your question?
So I think I have like 2 questions. So my first one is on like so when were you on like you were on the International Space Station, correct? Or were you on like some other space station? You were on the international
I was
one?
on the international one. And Wendy though went to the Mir, right, Wendy?
Yep, I was on the Russian Space Station twice.
So that was like the first. They had a space station starting in 1986.
Yep.
And then they had it for a really long time. And then they invited us to be part of that. And Wendy was one of the people that got to train and learn how to speak Russian and go.
Okay, who's on?
I just have like one more question. So I heard like you performed like a flute on the International Space Station, like the first flute duet. Like, how's the experience of like playing the flute on the in space? Is it like different than like on Earth, or is it like, you know, the same experience?
It's certainly different, Hussein. It depends what instrument you're playing. But for the flute, I'm gonna move my cat here. For the flute, when you play it like this here on Earth, you're actually kind of pushing it against your face with this finger. You're holding it up here with your thumb a little bit. You're actually just this, and you're sort of pushing it against your lip, and you've got a pinky out here, and you've got a finger out here. So it's kind of held in 3 places, here, here, here. But gravity is actually the 4th steadying force, the 4th place that steadies the flute. So when you get up to space, you still have these things, but you don't have gravity. And so it kind of bobbles around a little bit. It moves around a little bit. So I had to figure out a way to make sure it didn't move and I didn't sort of lose my place on the keys. In terms of how it sounds, we're literally like inside an airplane. You know, except we actually have more like 1 atmosphere of pressure instead of slightly less like you do on an airplane. So we can breathe. Sound actually sounds the same because we're not out in space, we're inside. And at the same time, it's just like Earth, where if I play in some place like a bathroom or a place with an echoey ceiling, then it's going to be really kind of vibrant and loud. And it's like that if I play in the airlock on the space station or in the cupola, because they have surfaces that are reflective. And if I play in our Japanese experiment module, where we have a lot of things that are stored and they're in cloth bags, then the sound gets absorbed by those bags, and the sound is kind of not as bright. And Hussein, I was thinking you might be a music person because I saw you like bopping around quite a bit earlier, and it seemed like maybe you were listening to music. Is that right? In the very beginning before we started? No?
Actually, anyway. I was not. I do play an instrument, but I was not listening to music. No.
Oh, okay. What do you play?
All right, so I'm going to go to a girl. And so Emmeline Elmore.
Emmeline. You were really close. Emmeline. And so my question was like, when you get back to Earth after being in space, what does it feel like? Does it feel weird when you get to gravity again? How does it feel?
When do you start and then I'll go?
You feel very heavy. It is fascinating to me how quickly the human body gets used to not having gravity pull on it. And for me, sometimes it felt harder to come back to Earth. You would think it would not be that way, that your body would go, oh, yeah, gravity. I've spent virtually my entire life in gravity, but coming back, your body literally forgets how much strength it takes to work against gravity. So, more than anything, right after you land, you feel like you're just this sack of potatoes. Your head feels heavy. And then you have to stand up. And that took a lot of effort. Even though I'd been exercising, my legs felt heavy, my chest felt heavy, my arms felt heavy. But Cady spent many, many more days up in space. So she had to do a lot of exercise to stay healthy. And so, Cady, after 6 months in space, what does gravity feel like?
To me, it was really interesting, partly because I think after a couple of flights, I think your body, like you said, it begins to adapt easily. I think that it learns, like it goes, the first time you come back, you're like, oh, this is so heavy. And the second time it is just as heavy, but you sort of know, like, oh, this is heavy. And if I have a bottle of water, someone hands me a bottle of water, it's going to be heavy. So I'd better hold on to it really tight. Whereas in space, I really might not have to hold on to it very, very tight, Max. And so I think you get so you know, and I found when I got back up to the space station, when I got to space, it was like, oh, I've been here. My body knows I know what to do. This is like this other place. You just kind of have two brains. And at the same time, it's mostly your head that really takes some getting used to being back in gravity and a little bit up in space. A lot of us actually don't feel well when we first get to space. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but it happens to a lot of people, and we have some great medicine that helps us with that. But coming home is actually almost harder because you've gotten used to, you can look up a video called Splitting Hairs in Gravity. And it is a little video that we made for Sandra Bullock for the Gravity movie, where you can actually take a hair from your head and pull it between your fingers like dental floss or something, and then push against something, and it will actually push you across the whole space station. So it takes very little force to move. And think about, those little sensors in your middle ear there that when you move, when you walk, when you sit, that those little cilia that know, hey, that there's fluid kind of going against them, right? That it goes, oh, this is happening. Think about such a tiny little force like the force of a hair. And so your middle ear is so tuned to very tiny forces that when I got back, I felt like Gulliver, like the sort of a giant kind of like waving back and forth. I mean, I was trying to stand, but the whole world was just going back and forth. And so it takes a little while for your head to get used to it. And even like 3 days later, if I would bend down to tie my shoes, I would kind of feel like the whole world was coming with me. So it takes a little getting used to, but it's no reason not to go. I really loved it up there.
Jennifer Burns.
Oh, okay. So what do you think was the hardest part of being one of the two out of 3 women in your class?
Well, I actually didn't think it was all that hard because I'd already been in that situation before. I was in the second class of women to attend the United States Naval Academy. So when I started there, in my class, there were over 1,200 of us, but only 100 women. All the rest were guys. When I got to my first squadron in the Navy, there were 2 other women. All the rest were men. So I looked around and I saw many more women working at NASA. And I thought, hey, finally, this is great. There are a lot of us here. So for me, I thought NASA was, I call it a breath of fresh air. It was a much better environment in terms of the number of women working there. So for me, honestly, it was something I was already used to, and I didn't really think about it a lot.
I think that's for us as people who are become part of a space crew or a class of astronauts, you're on a mission together. I mean, our mission as a class was to learn everything that we could learn to be ready to be astronauts. And I think the biggest challenge of the mission, and I think this is something that you experience in school too, the biggest challenge is understanding who's on your team and what they bring to the mission. and how to share what you bring to the mission with them. And I think to do those things, I think you have, people ask, what do you have to be like to be an astronaut? I think you have to be brave enough to stand up and say, hey, since I'm on your team, I thought you might like to know like what I'm good at and maybe what I'm not good at so you can help me when I'm not good. And so you have to be brave enough to stand up and do that. You have to be brave enough to ask somebody a question like, hey, so, you never really say much in class, but then I think you're really interested and I wondered like, what would be your favorite job to do on our team? It takes some courage to ask that question because sometimes you think, well, maybe that person is quiet because they just don't like to be here or they don't like me, or you can make up all sorts of reasons. But the hardest thing about being on a team, I think, is being brave enough to ask people who they are so you know what they bring to the team, and also making it easy for them to ask you. And when Wendy talked about being one of few women, I think the hardest part of that experience for me is that we all have different ideas and different experiences, and mine are different than some other people's. Some of that is because I'm a woman, some of it is because I'm just me. And to realize that, each of us comes from a different place, we have a different background, we bring something different. And so I think the way, I think in a way your question was, is there anything bad about that? Is there anything bad about being one of three? And the only thing that's bad is if we waste people, is if we don't get what we really think they could bring to the table, because we just look at them when they say, I have this idea, and we just look at them like, pretty different. We have an important mission. I don't know if that idea is good enough. I mean, when I went to do survival training with my two Russian now friends, we didn't really speak very much Russian or English between us. And the commander would go, Katya, your idea, you say again. It's so encouraging for me to go, okay, I'll explain it a different way, instead of having him just look at me like, I don't get it. Can't be as good as my ideas. So just some things to think about.
Great. I'm going to ask Christopher Yoon.
I have two questions. First, one, do you ever, like while you're in space on the space station, do you ever miss Earth or like the gravity?
The only time I miss gravity, Wendy can speak up too, is that, and Wendy knows me, I can be a little forgetful. I lose my phone a lot. I don't like to have things that don't have pockets because I lose my phone down here on Earth, right? And up in space, fortunately, we have pockets, so we don't lose things. But when you're trying to like unpack things, if you don't really keep track, something could float away. Or you have something in your hand, and then it doesn't weigh anything. I mean, this is kind of big, but let's say it's my hair tie. You kind of forget you have it because it doesn't really weigh anything. And so you forget, and then it goes somewhere, and it could be a really important piece of equipment. So it was stressful that everything could float away, because it could be lost. I mean, I found someone's pocket knife that had been up on the space station already for about 2 years, and nobody'd seen it. And suddenly, I mean, there it was, just like right in front of me. I'm like, fortunately closed. Okay, there it was. So you don't want to lose things. That's the only frustrating thing. Wendy, you want to jump in?
So to Cady's point, let's think about why things float away. We don't have gravity. So if you're an engineer and you have to design the system to create air for the crew to breathe, and then also make sure that air is healthy, stays healthy for the crew to breathe, you can't take advantage of what we have in place down here on Earth. I breathe in oxygen, I breathe out carbon dioxide. They have different weights, and so gravity pulls on it and it creates this circulation. We get what we call airflow, we get wind. All that occurs naturally. None of that occurs naturally inside the space station. So I have to move air around with fans. So if I'm not paying attention and I don't put my straw on a piece of tape and put it on the wall, if I let go, that current air is going to hit my straw and it's just going to float away. And who knows where it will end up? Maybe it'll end up on the air filter. A lot of things end up on the air filter, but that can be the frustrating part. But no, I didn't live on space long enough to miss gravity. It is incredibly fun to no longer have to work against gravity to be able to fly around like Superman. It's sad when your mission ends and you know that you have to come back and contend with gravity again.
Forever.
Forever, yeah.
So before you ask your second question, I'd like to ask everybody on the call, have any of you thought that perhaps maybe you would like to be an astronaut? Raise your hand.
And it's okay to say no. We're not going
It
to.
is okay, yeah.
Right. I'm just kind of interested. Okay. Thank you. All right, Christopher, what is your other question?
And I'm just curious, how's the Wi-Fi reception up there in space? Like, is it good or bad?
Oh, I wonder about that too.
Katie, that's the ones you should answer.
Okay. When I was up there, we did have the wireless, but it was in the days where you would double click and then you would have to wait and go to your happy place. And then the window would open. Like if we have a schedule and it's on the computer, and the schedule will say, okay, you're supposed to do this experiment starting on page 14. And so if I double click, it'll open up the procedure to page 14 there. But it is that double click, wait for happy place. So here you are, an astronaut in space on the space station, and the internet it wasn't from the internet, but the connectivity was very slow. And in fact, I thought the biggest crime actually was that when I was up there, we didn't have enough memory in our computers to load in Google Earth.
Yes.
And so literally, you'd look down, you go, oh, where is that? That looks so cool. And you take a picture, and then we only had, like, if we zoomed in on Google Earth, we would see, like, it'd be like giant Lego pictures. I mean, it really didn't show you what was what. And so I really love that they have better memory and faster computers and better internet. And that better internet as well. We would sync our email 4 times a day.
Yeah.
And so it really took almost a day to have a conversation. And when we did actually get to talk on the phone. We have an internet protocol phone. And pretty much when you'll lose the signal, but it does just happen that you just lose the signal. So you don't want to say it's like in the spy movies, cut the green wire, or, but first and then the reception goes out. You need to make sure that you like really use good sentences that if the comm cuts out, you haven't said anything that they're going to go, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So remember, everything we create here on Earth, like being able to have cell phone towers and the internet, you have to recreate onboard your spaceship, because we can't take advantage of the systems that are already necessarily on planet Earth. And so learning how to create Wi-Fi inside the space station and do it in a way where it doesn't interfere with the other equipment that needs to work, that takes a little bit of thought and consideration and some testing. And then you have to go build the equipment that's going to work up in that space environment as well. So it's a real engineering challenge.
Thank you. So, Sai, I know you've been patiently waiting. So let's have your question.
Hello. My question was that when I saw that in the California Science Center, there were some little miniature kind of spacecrafts that have limited space. How do you feel about when you fly to space and being in those small limited areas?
Well, remember, again, we can float. So look up over your head. Look up to your ceiling. Can you walk along your ceiling?
No.
You can't, because gravity is forcing you to be down on the floor. Up in space, if I wanted to go sleep on the ceiling, I did. That's where I slept on my last mission. So we can take advantage of all the available space. But Cady got to fly on board a spaceship called the Soyuz, which is much smaller than the space shuttle orbiter. So what did it feel like, Cady, to be in the small confined area of the Soyuz?
That's the part where you're sitting in the part where there's 3 seats. And so there's 1, 2, 3, and you really are shoulder to shoulder in your spacesuits. And in fact, we practice for survival training. Like if we land in the ocean, before we open the hatch, we're going to put on our survival suits, and we have to take off our spacesuits, and we literally have to like lay across, one person lays across the lap of the other 2, and the other 2 help them with their spacesuit. down to their long underwear kind of thing, and then help them put on their survival suit. So it's really a very, very, very small space. But that Soyuz that we go up in is actually bigger than you think, and the same volume is reflected in the spacecraft that Sai was mentioning. Like, do you mean like the Dragon, the SpaceX Dragon, and things like that? Is that what you're talking about, Sai? Or are you talking about sort of little CubeSats?
Yeah, those kind of ones where they're very tiny. You don't really have space to move at all.
Well, so Sai, there's things like called CubeSats where they literally are like this big. And they're actually like, if we put a big telescope up there that can do this, what if we put a whole bunch of cameras all around the Earth that are about this big, and now we can image the Earth with really good lenses. That's a company called Planet. So there's use of small satellites, but there's no people in them, right? These small things. But then the ones that we hear about a lot are SpaceX and also Boeing. And Blue Origin, where they've got capsules that fit about 6 people, but there's not all that much room. And I agree with Wendy that it's surprising. I mean, in zero G, you just kind of, I don't know, there's just more room than you would think. You can be in a very small space. In that cupola, the cupola like in back of me here, it's really not that big. I mean, I can touch both sides if I have my hands out here, right? But we can put 15 people up in there. I mean, and everybody can see out the window, and we just kind of get used to it. I remember in the shuttle, it's kind of like being in a minivan if we're downstairs in the mid deck, not up on the cockpit, but downstairs in the mid deck. And I remember looking, we had 7 people on our crew, and I was looking for Kathy Thornton, who was our other payload person. And I'm looking around, and then I looked upstairs, and I came back down. I'm like, she has to be here somewhere. Well, she was just she was like sitting cross-legged on the ceiling typing. I just don't. It's almost like our brains don't think to look up. And so we have a lot of space to use.
Cool. Thank you. All of you are asking really great questions. So Emmeline Elmore, you still have your hand up, and then Jolene, you'll be next, and then I'll go back to Husan.
This is kind of like a two-part question, but like, how do you shower? Because I know in gravity, the water will come down and kind of like bubbles and go up. How do you shower how do you shower?
We do not. We don't shower. And it's actually a choice, but that doesn't mean we're not clean, Emmeline. And well, I mean, mostly, but especially up on the space station, we have the room and everything where, Wendy, you had a drink bag. Can you show the drink bag? Do you have it there? Yeah. So that's what we drink out of, and you can poke a straw into it. But we have ones that are just empty, like that drink, I think, was maybe coffee or something, or pineapple juice. There'd be powder in the bottom of that. But we have a lot of bags that have nothing in them, and then we fill them up with water. We do that with warm water. And we'll put warm water, we'll have a straw, and then I'll squirt that warm water on a washcloth. We use this no rinse shampoo and soap, just like they use in hospitals. And you can just do a little scrub everywhere, and maybe wipe it off or not, but you feel really just as clean. And even with all this hair, it took me probably a little longer to wash my hair than it would take Christopher to wash his hair. But it takes me like 5 minutes. It would take Christopher maybe a minute and a half, right? But I would just take mine and stick it up in a rubber band on the top of my head, like in a knot, and I'd take one of those drink bags filled with warm water, and I would squirt water. I'd take a little shampoo, squirt, smush. Oh, Wendy's going to show us maybe. Yeah, there you go. Awesome.
Be easy with short hair. So there's the drink bag, and he's squirting some water in his hair, and then he took the rinseless shampoo, which you actually do need to rinse. We find much easier when you have short hair like Mike. Much harder when you have longer hair.
Yeah, not so bad though, because I would just take that, and then I would take a towel and I would sop it out like that, and then I would add a little water, smush, and I would do that like 3 times. It would take around 5 minutes or so, and I would have like 3 towels. Like there was my towel I used last time. That would be the first towel, like the sort of dirty towel, and then the next towel would be one that was like not so dirty, and then the new towel would be like, oh, new towel day, so then that would be the one that was mostly clean water, and my hair would be like big. Some people, I did help Sandra Bullock for the Gravity movie, and she said, every time I saw you, I wanted to give you a scrunchie. But for me, it was actually really like my hair was never in my way, because it goes with you everywhere you go. So it's very cool.
But it's never in your way. So on my first flight, I flew with Tammy Jernigan, who's got hair as long as Cady, and Tammy kept her hair in a ponytail, which floated straight back from her head like this. And so we didn't have a lot of room. And every time Tammy turned around, that ponytail would be going like this. And I learned that I could not be anywhere near Tammy because as she turned around, I was going to get hit in the face with the ponytail.
It's true. Actually, so I think you shared that with me, Wendy. And so there is a way to braid your hair so it goes back down the bottom of your head, so it wasn't, and my hair isn't quite as long. Anyways, I saw we maybe had more questions.
Well, I'm going to go to Maya just because she hasn't asked a question yet. And then I'll go back to Jolene. Maya?
Does it feel any different sleeping in space than on Earth?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I've heard, I know how it is for me, excuse me, and that if you sleep well on Earth, you're going to sleep well in space. And here's Wendy with great pictures. So there's our sleeping bags. Now this is in the space station. Is that Polanski? Is that who I see?
I think it is Polanski. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, we can all recognize each other. And so we have these sleeping bags and they have holes so your arms can come out. Now on the space station, actually just around the corner from where they are, we have the people those are the shuttle crew. So they're kind of visiting. And the space station crew, we have a little cabin and there we go. I love that. There's TJ. And that's actually my cabin. TJ and I shared the same cabin. Anyways, and so you can go in there and your sleeping bag can be strapped to the wall. I like to have mine untethered and I like to sleep kind of curled up in a ball. So I would pull my knees up like this and then I would zip up the sleeping bag and I'm kind of short enough that I can do that, but it kept my knees up. And then I would be like a little ball. And sometimes when you wake up in the morning, you're actually like looking at the bottom of your computer desk and you just don't even know where you are. And I would wake up thinking, oh, I'm in space. I'm still in space. I'm so glad.
Talk about the pillow, how you talked about.
Oh, that some people miss having a pillow. And so they actually give you the option of having a pillow that straps to your head. So you have this feeling of laying on a pillow, even though, you have it, Wendy. Wendy's so
I think you can see. That blue strap, there's a block of foam beneath his head. And he wanted to have his head feel like it was on a pillow. So you literally could strap your head to a pillow. Now,
isn't that fun?
I am a person down here on Earth who tends to not sleep all that well at night. I move into a lot of different positions because after a while, I feel kind of the pressure point of the mattress on my body and it's not comfortable. I love being able to float inside my sleeping bag and literally feel like I was just suspended there in the middle of the air. I'm baffled by some of my colleagues who wanted to have that sensation of being on a mattress and feeling like their head was on a pillow. I just never got that. I never understood why they would want to do that.
Okay, let's get back. And I want to ask Jolene and then Emmeline.
During one of your flights, you reported to Houston Mission Control that you spotted a UFO. What did it look like? Has there been any theories on what it could have been?
Well, it's so Jolene, I think it's great you brought that up. I was my very first mission, and we were we were in the laboratory in the back of the space shuttle. And so it's like a module of the space station. It's that long. It's like the size of a school bus in the back of the space shuttle. And that's our laboratory where we're practicing what's it going to be like to do experiments up on the space station. So we're in there and there's cameras at either end. And the ground said, hey, Cady and Fred, that was my crewmate, would you guys mind if we switch to camera 2? Because they're always supposed to tell us if they're filming us and stuff. And we go, no problem. And we practiced this on the ground where, they would ask us and we would respond. And then they said, okay, switching. And then we went to go ahead and work on camera 1 because it wasn't quite mounted in the right place. And we weren't looking at where it was pointing. So it's probably pointing at all these like embarrassing places, right? And so we did very bad astronaut TV, we knew. But we weren't worried about it because they already switched cameras. And like 2 minutes later, they called up and they go, okay, we're on camera 2 now, meaning you've been showing us really terrible astronaut pictures, right? So we're really embarrassed, and my crewmate was really embarrassed, and he launches himself down the module, but we're like, so he can just fly, but we're new at this. It's our very first day in space, and so he actually bumps his head on the ceiling and bounces off, and anyways, and I said, Houston, we have an unidentified flying object, and it's not very good. And then I went to work, and I built the glove box, and I spent about an hour working on a project and didn't talk to anybody. But the internet made it a different story than what really happened. And it's a very cute story, I think.
All right. And Emmeline?
Okay, so I have two questions. So
We're going to have to keep it to one, honey, because we're running out of time.
so basically, it's like when your gas runs out in the spaceship, what do you do? Like, is it gas that keeps it running, like to go back up and down?
The fuel, you mean? What
Yeah, to go.
Yeah.
Actually, the space station doesn't require any fuel to stay in orbit. These are some of the things that you'll study in high school in a subject called physics. But if we get the space station traveling fast enough, it will continue to orbit around the Earth. And it was the same thing when we launched either the Soyuz rocket or the space shuttle. You have to have fuel, rocket fuel, to get you high enough up above the Earth and traveling fast enough in order to stay in orbit. But once you are established in that orbit, you don't need fuel. Your rocket engines don't need to continue to burn.
Does it like stop, or does it like stop at random times, or no?
So the engines will stop. So it took the space shuttle and the Soyuz roughly 8.5 minutes to get high enough up above Earth to stay in orbit. Once you are high enough, you stop burning your engines. Now, if we wanted to go back to the moon or onto Mars, our rocket ship has to be a little bit higher and it has to be traveling a little bit faster. So you would continue to burn your engines longer so you could get to that point where you were fast enough that you could leave orbit around the Earth and you had enough speed, or what we call velocity, to travel onto the moon.
Great. Okay. Husan, real quick, question?
My question was that I heard that in Mars, they said they have a theory that in Mars millions of years ago, there was actually water there. Has there been any proof or evidence that has been found to back up this claim?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we have the rovers there. We have Curiosity and now Perseverance laboratory rovers. We can take a lot of pictures. We've seen in pictures features that look similar to what we see on Earth. And we say, we see that feature on Earth and it was formed due to flowing water or there being a lake there. And then you look at Mars and say, very same features. Now we have better science instruments, and I'll let Cady elaborate on some of them. We have better science instruments that now can core down, drill down into the surface, down below the surface, and do some analysis. And so we're actually being able to detect evidence that water was there. There's evidence of frozen water beneath the surface of Mars. So yeah, we are getting better confirmation that yes, Mars used to have water. How much water? I don't know that we can say specifically yet, but definitely we have strong indications that there used to be lakes on the surface of Mars.
And I encourage all of you to go ahead and look at the Perseverance Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. They call her Percy, and they named her a her. The team that launched her, and where she puts out, hey, this is what I'm doing today. This is why it's important. And they've landed right in the middle of the Jethro crater, where if, over years and years and years of erosion and as water's gone away, this is the place where we would see basically the signs of past life. And so we're really excited about finding that on Mars. But I urge you to keep up with wherever you like to read about science. They're doing a really good job of explaining what Perseverance is finding these days.
So we
And
have
you all live in Southern California, so it's the Jet Propulsion Laboratory up in Pasadena that is controlling the rover missions. So maybe you have an opportunity during the school year or the summer to go visit NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and learn more about the rovers.
So Wendy, I'm going to tell just real quick, we're going to wrap it up, but we're going to go a little bit over because two things. First of all, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, for the high school kids, they get to go there as part of their reward for the reading challenge. So very excited about that for them.
Such a cool place.
Yes,
so
it's
I'm
an
going to
awesome
ask
place.
that with questions just be super quick so that we can let people have lunch and have a little bit of a break. But Husan, I'm going to ask you to ask your question, and it's got to be quick. And Wendy and Cady will keep the answers a little shorter so we can get to the last 4 or 5 questions.
My question might be a little weird, but I've heard that like toilets are a bit different on like the space station because obviously like the gravity will affect the whole sewage thing. So how is like the experience of like using the toilet on the space? That's what I really wanted to know.
Well, I'll just say that it's easier than like any camping trip I've ever been on. Because you're not having to work against gravity to kind of get your bottom close enough to the ground to be going to the bathroom. And we use a system of vacuum where it just pulls everything into the right place, and it's really clean. It's so easy. All these stories about floating pieces of things you wouldn't want to be floating, at least on my missions, have been never really happened. It's really easy and kind of cool.
Okay, thank you. Sai?
My question is, I heard that on Earth, actually, there are some astronauts called pillonauts and they lay on beds in different positions and they get reactions and conditions based on their positions. How does that job help astronauts decide like what reactions they're going to have in space and how to find solutions?
So those are called bed rest studies. And so basically we put people in a situation where they're not using their muscles and bones to work against gravity, because when we're up in space, we're not working against gravity anymore. And so one of the ways your muscles stay strong is you pick something up and you have to work against gravity to move it around. So that exercises your muscles attached to your bones. And as you move your muscles around, they pull on your bones and it helps your bones maintain their strength. So basically, for the scientists and the doctors who are studying the human body and how it adapts to the absence of gravity, Cady talked about doing some science on the space shuttle before we did it on the space station to practice. We practice with those people who lie in bed for a long period of time. The doctors study them, and if they get an indication that maybe something is not working with a particular part of the human body, like your heart behaves differently, it pumps blood differently when a person's in bed for a long time, they can then go study the astronauts who are up in space for a long period of time to see if those similar issues occur. So we use the bed rest kind of as a practice, as a preliminary experiment to get an indication of what the problems might be when the astronaut goes up into space.
And it's harder than you would think to agree to stay in bed for a really long time. It's, can be boring. You think you might read stuff or learn stuff, but it's very generous of these people to take their time to do these studies. We really appreciate it very much.
Yes, because basically they're not allowed to move.
Wow. All right, Jolene. And then Reagan, and then Maya, and then we'll wrap it up.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Can we keep it to one, hon?
Okay. What advice would you give to people who want to become astronauts in the future?
Good question.
I would say that we're going to need all sorts of different people to be astronauts. And when you do things that mean something to you, when you follow a path where you're curious and you want to know, and or you just feel like, wow, I just think I'd like to contribute like this. You don't have to feel like, oh, I'm good at this, but more just like, this is something I'd like to know more about and do more of. That is the path to follow for you. And that's going to be a path that kind of changes and takes different turns. And realize that when you are being your best self, that means that is who you need to bring to the astronaut corps. And it doesn't matter exactly what field it's in. More likely in terms of getting selected these days is still going to be to have studied to be in a field that is in, used as a technical field. And at the same time, within that field, whatever is your best self, your most excited, your most curious and creative self, that is going to be the self you want to bring.
Just to add to what Cady said, specifically, NASA's looking for people who've gone to a college or a university and have gotten a degree in math, science, or engineering. I talked about the fact that it took 25 years to make that dream come true. That's a long time. And so to Cady's point, you need to find something that you really enjoy doing, because you will continue to do it month after month and year after year if you generally enjoy what you're doing. So that's where we go back to giving the advice of find something you enjoy doing and then focus on that, because you're much more likely to do well at it and to continue to do well at it if you enjoy doing it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Reagan.
I was wondering, what are like the most important things to know when becoming an astronaut?
Oh, probably not one thing. An important ability is the ability to learn, because Cady and I talked about this before. You've done something else before you become an astronaut. So that means you show up at NASA and you have to learn how to be an astronaut. You've not done that job before. And there are many different things that you need to be able to learn. So one, having an interest in learning new things is important, and developing the ability to learn new things is very important. And I'd say more than anything, just maintain a sense of curiosity and wonder. Why does something behave a particular way? When you have that sort of interest, it's enjoyable for you to study and to learn that answer.
Great.
And
Maya,
really,
you're our last question. Oh, go ahead, Cady. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. But just really, really quick, you'll never get to be an astronaut or anything else you're interested in doing if you don't volunteer. Raise your hand. And raising your hand often means filling out some kind of application. Or, let's say you want to be a veterinarian. You'd like to know more about what it's like to be a veterinarian. Raise your hand. You bring in your cat to the vet or whatever to say, could I ever come watch? Could I come ask you what you like about that? So raising your hand, thinking, and when somebody says, well, we'd like some help here. What do you think you could help us with? Well, I'm somebody who works hard. Learn how to sort of say who you are and what you bring, and how to write that on an application. So that means really paying a lot of attention. When you have, English class or language class where you're having to write a paragraph and your teacher wants you to write a really perfect paragraph. Well, that comes in really handy when you only get a paragraph to tell somebody why you should be the person that they pick to come and spend time with them, with their team. And so, whether you want to be an astronaut or anything else, learning how to kind of say, here I am, and here's why I think, you should let me come spend time with your team.
Great. Maya, your question.
What do you eat in space?
Aha. Wendy, you start listing. I'll show a quick picture real quick, okay?
We have a wide variety of things that we eat. We actually have a group of people who work at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. They work in the food laboratory. They are people who've studied food science, and it's their job to come up with the menus of things that we eat. Food is in a little different form. We can't take a lot of it. It can't take up a lot of room, and we don't have a refrigerator. So I can't just keep everything I want to eat in the refrigerator for storage. So some food is what we call freeze-dried. I have to put water back in it. This is a block of macaroni and cheese. I literally slide a needle in here that's attached to a water dispenser, and it puts either hot or cold water in here, and I can heat it up in an oven. So this is one form of mac and cheese.
I'm showing little pictures in the background, Wendy.
We have
of all
snack food, gummy bears, they're fun. So we take some regular food.
Here's one with a drink bag.
Yeah, a drink bag. So we have a special straw. All our beverages are in powdered form. And when we're done drinking, we can clamp our straw off. Some food's prepared so that we don't have to refrigerate it, similar to what people in the military have. This is also macaroni and cheese. It's a big package, but this can stay in storage for months, if not years. And so you might get up, we have different things that you can eat. We have trail mix or granola bars, a bag of nuts if you want some snacks. You can have oatmeal in the morning or cereal, scrambled eggs. We can add water back into that, scrambled eggs and sausage patties. We tend not to fly bread. Think about what happens when you eat some bread. It makes crumbs. The crumbs float around. We love tortillas. That looks like Thanksgiving dinner. Taco shells?
I think they had a taco night. I think they brought them all this taco stuff. Yep.
Speaking of tacos, we're trying to figure out how to grow plants in space. And so the newest plant growth experiment is with chili peppers, hatch peppers. And so the crew had a taco night. They picked some of their peppers and prepared them. Apparently they were still very spicy, had quite a kick.
Really?
But, yes. So we try and fly a wide variety of food because we don't want people to get bored. You know, if you want pizza, it's got to come from planet Earth, okay? There's no Domino's delivery up in space. But we want the crew to, even after 6 months in space, still be interested in eating the food that they have on board. So we're very hard to make sure there's a variety of things for the crew to eat.
So we're going to wrap up, but what I'd like you to do is to be sure that we thank both of our astronauts, Miss Lawrence and Miss Coleman, for taking their time. This was the third hour because they talked to the kindergarten first, and then the second and third graders, and second and fourth graders, and now the middle grades. So we just are so grateful that they were here to answer all your questions and share their experiences. So let's all be sure and say, thank you, astronauts.
Thank you, astronauts.
Thank you, astronauts.
Thank you, astronauts.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome. We enjoyed your questions.
Yeah, the questions were wonderful. And we want to encourage you to read, read, read. Because with reading, you can be whatever it is you want to be. And so we welcome you to an exciting future. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your vacation.
Bye.
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 Thanks for great questions.
Thank you. You're very welcome.